Hi guys, I'm your host Adishri and this is Past the Pleasantries, the podcast where we ditch the awkwardness and talk all things periods. From pads to policy, stigma to solutions, let's break the silence. Join us in conversations that matter.
Do you just want to start off by introducing yourself and what Pachamama is and all of that?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Ella Lambert and I'm the CEO and founder of the Pachamama Project, which is basically an organisation growing this network of incredible volunteers all around the world to make reusable menstrual pads, like the ones that I'm showing you right now, which we then distribute to refugees and vulnerable people who experience period poverty. So that's what we do really in a nutshell.
Nice. What sort of led you to start the project? You said it was in your second year. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get started with it?
So lockdown happened. I, in those very initial stages, had this moment where I was like, okay, we could get people making them. And then I had to finish my exams and stuff. So I really parked it, went home, finished my exams, and then I borrowed a sewing machine from a friend. I learned how to sew on YouTube and figured out how to make a pad. And I really, still to this day can't make anything else. And then I basically contacted everyone that I could think of. I messaged schools and universities and craft groups and places of worship and was just like, I'm doing this, does anyone want to join me? And within no time at all, I had hundreds of people getting back saying, yeah, we'd love to. Loads of people were shielding and, didn't have anything else to do and were like, I could be sewing instead and being part of this project. Fast forward nearly 5 years later, and we've got nearly 3,000 volunteers in 14 countries. We've made collectively over 160,000 pads and supported over 20,000 people out of period poverty now. And the pads last 5 years. So once you get a pack, you are sorted. It's not it's not a one-time solution. It's, keeping girls in school and women in work because they can rely on it.
That's amazing. No, that leads very well into why did you choose reusable pads over disposable pads?
Yeah, so I'm really aware, and I'm always make sure I say this when I'm asked this question. I really am aware that reusable pads aren't going to work for everyone, right? There's going to be places, especially in really emergency situations, where people don't have access to washing facilities, water, etc., and it just wouldn't be viable. But we know that for the people that it does work for, it works for the foreseeable future, and it really sorts the problem. And so we could, pour money into buying disposable products for people, and I think that's a really worthwhile thing that other organisations are doing. But I think what we can do is offer a long-term solution which really solves the problem in a really sustainable way. And we just make sure that we work with our partners. We work with an organisation called Pads for Refugees, and they do disposable pads, and we try and go wherever they go and vice versa, so that for people in any given situation, they're able to access both. And in situations, for example, we've sent disposable pads to Gaza and we've sent disposable pads to Ukraine and the surrounding countries when the situation has been so emergency that people are just on the move and don't have access to washing facilities. So we do try and do a bit of both where necessary. But yeah, our sort of main focus is reusables.
Was that because of its long-term viability or because of which one drove it more, the sustainability or the long-term viability?
I think both is really, really important. When I started the project, it was very much about providing a long-term solution for people and really solving a problem. But I've always tried to do it in the most sustainable way possible. And the reason why I knew about reusable pads was because Bristol is like a really sustainable city, and lots of my friends were using reusable pads, etc. So it's always been very prominent in my mind that was important. And even like we encourage our volunteers to source fabric secondhand. So the only bit that actually has to be new is the layer of fabric that touches the skin. Everything else can be secondhand. We just want it to be as sustainable as possible, so that they also keep the fabric from landfill and are just made as sustainably as possible. So that is also really important. Also, just on a practical level, a lot of places where we're supporting are in rural areas where they don't necessarily have access to like the waste disposal infrastructure that you need to use disposable pads, and so people are burning the products, and products are made of like up to 90% plastic, like disposable sanitary pads, which is obviously horrendous for the environment and not good for people's health either. So that was never our primary focus, but you know, like with all things, there are so many like accidental benefits that come from this little nifty solution.
So you say you've got volunteers who create them, but how do you sort of source the lining, like the part that touches the skin? Like, how do you finance?
Yeah, so we get some funding, we get some grant funding, and we also crowdfund to pay for materials, and we ask where possible for our volunteers to source their fabric for free. So we send them a guide on like getting fabric from the local community, getting offcuts from fabric companies, stuff that would normally end up in landfill that they can use instead. And then where that's not possible, we will supply it to our UK-based volunteers. Unfortunately, we're not in a position yet to do that. Where we have volunteers abroad, we just don't have the infrastructure. But our volunteers know that signing up. And a lot of people, I think, because it's their hobby sewing, they're already buying fabric. And often it's like it's their charity as well, you know, like you might donate to, you know, a charity every month, or, you know, you might put some money every month towards buying some fabric to make products. And so a lot of our volunteers see it in that way. And we do as best we can to provide it where we can.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's just such a smart idea.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, I think it was just really lucky that I had the idea in a time where I had the time to develop it and to launch it. And I think it's so scalable because they're so easy to make and they're so enjoyable to make. I think a lot of times when you're doing volunteer work, you're doing it for others, and I like to think that this is doing it for others as much as it is doing for yourself. You know, our volunteers get so much out of it, and they get a community, and they get to do something creative, and they get to learn a new skill. And then the benefit of that also is that they are helping solve period poverty. You know, it feels like a win-win-win.
Yeah, I think there's also like a sense of pride in like having made something at the end of it and be like, yeah, this is like what I've done.
Exactly, and we say to our volunteers, like, whether you make 2 or 2,000 or even 20,000, like some of our volunteers have made, you are really, really valued in our community, because ultimately 8 pads is 1 person. You know, you only have to make 8, and then you've sorted someone out for at least 5 years. That's seeing someone through to the end of their secondary education. That's, you know, supporting someone who is living in a tent and can't leave their tent for 5 to 10 days every month because they're on their period and they are going to leak through their clothes because they don't have products. So even if you do a very little amount, you're still having a major impact on someone, and that's really important, you know.
Yeah. So how did you so you said you were working with what was their name?
Yeah, we work with refugees and Pads for Refugees, the organisation. Yeah.
So how did you get in touch with them and collaborate with them?
Do you know what? When I first started the project, I actually ended up moving to Greece. And that was the first place we ever distributed the pads, in an island called Lesbos, just off the coast of Turkey. You probably would have seen photos if you've seen like dinghies arriving on the coast in Europe for the first time. It's like an entry point for a lot of refugees in the Middle East and Africa. And so that's where we distributed our pads. And so I started working there, and I was also working for another organisation running like a mental health programme and a digital skills programme for people who were living in the refugee camp there. And I actually met Melissa, who is my partner, who runs Pads for Refugees, through that because they were working with the organisation I was working for. So they work in similar ways to us. They provide money rather than products to organisations to buy the products, and then the partner organisations distribute. And that's how we work, really. We provide the product, but we work with like community-led partners to actually do the distribution, so that the pads are coming from people who are from within the community, speaking their language, understanding the needs, etc., rather than me just turning up around the world and handing out products. So yeah, a really happy accident, and we just really got on and obviously have the same mission, so have tried to work together as much as possible. But yeah, actually all our partners, bar a few, have come to us, which I think has worked really well, because it means that we really know that the need is there. These are people who have seen our work and been like, this would work so well for our community. And so we're not sort of just spinning the globe and like hoping to find people that need them, you know, it's people coming to us instead.
Nice. What has been your biggest sort of challenge in starting, scaling?
I get asked this question a lot, and it's so tricky because I think when you're just running something every day, you just get on with it, don't you? I think initial challenges were around stigma. I was really concerned in the beginning that we would struggle to distribute them when there was so much stigma around it, but I think we've actually done this very successfully through our work with community-led partners, and I think it is the best way to do it when you've got organisations who deeply understand the needs of the community and understand the stigma particular to that community and the myths, etc. And we do a lot of work around menstrual health education. So we do training with all our partners and make sure that the pads are distributed along with menstrual health education. So they're not just receiving a pad and being sent on their way, but that they know how to wash it and they know how to use it. And, you know, we do the feedback and they understand about puberty and the menstrual cycle and even menopause. And so we've been able to overcome a lot of those sort of teething issues. So that, and then also just setting up an organisation and being a young founder and having to learn everything on the job, you know, like you don't just know how to run a charity. But I've been really lucky and have had a lot of like mentors along the way and a lot of people that have been very willing to give advice and figured stuff out along the way.
On that note, are there any surprising sort of lessons or insights, whether that was about starting your own thing or about the work that you've done, that you're like, oh, didn't know that?
I couldn't believe some of the myths around menstruation. And I think even here, like, I think my menstrual health education was funky, frankly. I remember like I was taken into like a corner of a dark room, girls only, and they like this teacher like slapped a sanitary pad on her arm and said like, this is how you do it, girls, and we were like, oh, like terrified. But when you hear some of the things that people are taught, it's just insane. Like a lot of the people that we support, for example, in Lebanon, a lot of the Syrian Palestinian refugees and local Lebanese people believe that you shouldn't shower when you're on your period, for example. And so people are going like, 5 to 10 days not showering when they live in a tent, when they live in really difficult conditions, which is obviously, not good for you, especially when you're on your period. And so that's been something that we've had to like work on unpacking. We do a lot of work in Uganda, for example, mostly with school students to try and keep them in education. And some of the myths, for example, are if a crow steals your menstrual pad, you'll become infertile, or if a menstrual pad touches a river, it will run dry. And just so many myths that just keep us so small and keep us so afraid and are just a load of nonsense. So those things have surprised me, but what has surprised me more is how easy it is to unpack, because actually, like, you hear this thing and you think, oh, how are we ever going to solve period poverty if these kind of myths are believed, How are we ever going to get to a point where people feel comfortable enough to talk about periods and ask for products when they need them, and for laws to change and all of this that needs to happen in order for us to end period poverty? But then you see that within 1 hour of a workshop where you're giving the facts and showing the science, and giving out a really beautiful product which makes people excited rather than frightened, you see how easy it is that it's all unpacked.
So has your work also been with like men, and like, do you think the stigma only comes from like the people that need the pad, or do you think it's more, there's a larger system too?
No, we absolutely need to get men and boys involved in the conversation at every stage of the conversation, right? So like when I go into schools and do talks, for example, like one of my key things is the boys have to be in the room as well, and we have to talk about periods, and we have to be able to talk about periods around the dinner table, because it's just like, it's an essential cycle for life itself. So it is. And also I think like, I don't just care about things that affect me directly. Like, I think homelessness is horrendous and we should solve that. I'm not homeless. Like, you don't have to only care about things that affect you. And so men and boys should also be involved in the conversation and care about this, not because they have periods, but because it's a terrible situation that people experience generally. So yeah, it's really important. There's also the fact that, for example, in NGOs, like the majority of directors of the WASH sector, so the water and sanitation sector, are actually men. And so if we're not educating the NGO sector as well, then you can easily have situations where period poverty and menstrual health education, etc., is not prioritised, which is what is happening. And then also getting men and boys involved in the conversation on the community level as well, because it's all very well us doing a distribution and telling women and girls that they should be able to talk about periods openly and that they can go skipping down the road with a tampon in hand, waving it about, and you'll be absolutely fine. That doesn't work if they then go home and their husbands and fathers and brothers continue the shaming cycle. But we've seen like really amazing results. So for example, in Lebanon, when we first started, we were distributing our pads through a free shop. So it's literally a shop where you can go and get everything for free. You get tokens, but you get the dignity of a shopping experience rather than just being handed out donations. Anyway, so we were supplying our pads in there, and initially we had to do the distribution behind a curtain at the back of the shop. The men had to like all leave the shop. Distributions were women only, etc. And like within months that had completely flipped on its head, and now like 5 years later, the men who run the shop along with the women are just as involved in the menstrual health project. They are trying to find ways to get the pads over the border to Syria, for example. They're trying to like convince us to get pad making sessions running, and they're the ones sorting and packing the pads and doing the checkout, etc. So you see how this changes so quickly once you start normalizing the conversation. Because if for your whole life you are never allowed to talk about a subject, then why would you, unless it's broached in a different way, right?
Yeah. I guess sort of on that same topic, what do you think that businesses, like the government, individuals themselves, what do you think they can do to support the cause?
So Scotland is the first country to have written into law that period products are a right, like that everyone should have access to free products. So if you're in Scotland, you can get free products from your local authority. In the UK-wide, there's a free period scheme for schools. So every state school and college can access free period products for their students. So that is a fantastic start. But I think what people need to understand is that we as a society need to take responsibility for this issue, right? So that's governments, that's also just society in general, it's communities. Every time you go to a public bathroom, toilet roll is free, right? You don't even think about it. You don't take loo roll in your bag with you. And so free, period products should be free as well, in my opinion. If, they always say like if men have periods, period products would be free. I think it's probably true. But I think there's definitely things that governments can do. They can get involved with schemes like what we've just spoken about, and make sure that everyone has access to free products, because ultimately no one should be missing out on the same education as their brothers simply because they have a period. Women should not be missing work every month because they have a period. It's more than just not being able to afford products or not being able to access products. What period poverty is doing is having long-term consequences on poverty cycles and on gender equality. Because if you're missing school every single month, you're not going to end up with the same opportunities as the boys in your class. And so I think the first thing is making people aware of those long-term consequences, rather than, speaking about period poverty as sort of an academic concept, like the actual reality of it and what impact it has on people.
And what do you think that maybe for those that currently can't access it, what sort of measures do you think we can put in place to help people around that, not in just sort of giving products away, but in like a systemic way?
So the biggest thing we can do, and I know everyone says this, but it's have the conversation, because in a lot of cases, actually, we speak to people who could access products. Like, there are NGOs who are offering products, or they could go to their school nurse and get products, or they could ask, who hasn't asked a friend in the bathroom, if they could borrow a pad or whatever. But they don't, because they're afraid, because of the stigma. And so step one is sorting that out, like having ads with, I think this is happening more and more anyway, but like having ads with red blood rather than blue blood in them, and calling them period products, calling it what it is. We work with an organisation in Pakistan, and when we first started distributing there, the male members of the organisation were the ones sort of sorting the pads and handing them out. Anyway, we did like a few trials, and they kept coming back to us saying, can you please keep giving us those household products? And our partner organisation was like, what are they talking about? And it turns out what they were talking about is our pads. And I thought this was hilarious, but I also was really grateful that the men were advocating for the women in the way that they knew how, which was asking for them. Not long after that, I went to the House of Lords for an event, and I was in the bathroom, and above the period product bin was a sign which said like women's items or something, and I was like,
we're in the UK.
In the UK, and I was like, we're all the same, and like it starts here, right? It starts here. Like, we need to deal with this issue. Like, we need to be able to talk about it in order to be able to fix it.
Yeah.
So that's where we should start.
Women's items is crazy.
It's crazy.
What advice would you give young activists or young entrepreneurs, whoever wants to start their own movement, get involved in another movement?
I would say start. I think I definitely, when I was younger, spent a lot of time seeing all the horrendous things that were happening in the world and watching the news and feeling very upset and very helpless and feeling very much like there was not much I could do about it. And truthfully, everyone can do something, and it's what I was saying before about, some of our volunteers, if they make 8 pads and never make any again, they've still had a huge impact on one person, and that is enough. Like, it is all about one person at a time to make real change. And so, if you're sitting there and you're thinking, I would really like to do something about this issue, then start in whatever way you can, with whatever skills that you have, and you just don't know where it can take you. Like, when I started the Pachamama Project, I very much thought it would be a lockdown project, and it would be like, I've got this extra free time, I'm going to learn to sew, maybe I'll send some products to an organisation and we'll see how it goes. And never could I have imagined that 5 years later we'd have a international organisation working, supporting people in 11 countries, volunteers in 14 countries. You just don't know what can happen and how much impact that you can have. And the other thing I would say is just general advice is be reactive, and like have your ear to the ground and take every opportunity and just run with it. Sometimes you're not going to feel ready, and things are going to feel a bit overwhelming, but you never know where things can take you.
And if someone was to want to get involved with Pachamama specifically, how would they go? How would they get in touch?
So anyone can get involved, whether you can sew or not. It's the easiest project in the world. So if you just pop us an email at the Pachamama Project at outlook.com, and Pachamama is spelled Pachamama. We will send you all the instructions and the video and picture instructions and guidance, etc., on how to make the pads. You'll be invited into our wonderful community of other volunteers to give you lots of tips and advice. And you can join the Pachamama family. It's really that simple.
This is more out of curiosity, but where did you come up with the name?
So Pachamama is actually Mother Earth for the people of the Andes. I studied Spanish at university, so I'd heard of her. And she's also the goddess of menstruation. So
Nice, yeah, because I never knew that. I was like, where does it come
I also
from?
just think it's such a lovely word, and then I think of my volunteers as like Pachamamas and Pachapapas. And my real mum is very involved in Pachamama. She's our chair and she does our logistics, so I think of her as the Pachamama.
That's actually really sweet.
Yeah.
Well, this was really amazing. I've loved listening to this.
Oh, thank you. I would love chatting to you.
Well, thank you.